Good morning, boys and girls. In our Farmer Boy reading today, we are going to be hearing about the threshing process. So for farmers who have grain, there is a specific process of the stalks that rise from the ground, removing the grain, and it takes a while. They have machines that do that, but they didn't have all of the same tools back then that they do now. So let's hear about this process of getting grains that would be made or used for breads especially. So let's hear about it in our chapter, Threshing. So for my book, this is on page 305. I will present over to that screen now. Okay. Now the wind howled and the snow whirled, and a mournful sound came from the cedars. These skeleton apple trees. Why do you think that's called a skeleton tree? It does look like a skeleton without its leaves, that is. It's just a bunch of limbs. Rattled their branches together like bones. Ooh, good simile there. The trees being compared to a skeleton, and the branches compared to bones. All outdoors was dark and wild and noisy, but the solid, strong barns were quiet. The howling storm beat upon them, but the barns stood undisturbed. They kept their own warmth inside themselves. When Almanzo latched the door behind him, the noise of the storm was not so loud as the warm stillness of the barns. The air was quiet. The horses turned in their box stalls and whinnied softly. The colts tossed their heads and pawed. The cows stood in a row, placidly swinging their tasseled tails. You could hear them chewing their cuds, just the inside of their mouth. Almanzo stroked the soft noses of the horses and looked longingly at the bright-eyed colts. Then he went to the tool shed where Father was mending a flail. Now, the flail had come off its handle, and Father had put them together again. Let me get a picture of a flail for you. I think I've got one right here. Yep, here it is. It was a tool used for threshing grain, made of a long wooden handle attached with leather loops to a shorter stick. Okay, so there's that leather loop attaching, the two sticks. The grain was laid out on the floor of a barn, and a thresher would swing the handle of the flail in a circular motion, first down, back, then around and over the head. So we'll see that being used in our chapter today quite a bit, the flail. So the flail had come off its handle, and Father had put them together again. The flail was an iron wood stick, 3 feet long, and as big around as a broom handle. It had a hole through one end. Its handle was 5 feet long, and one end was a round knob. Now Father put a strip of cowhide through the hole in the flail, and riveted the ends together to make a leather loop. He took another strip of cowhide and cut a slit in each end of it. He put it through the leather loop on the flail. Then he pushed the slits over the knobbed end of the handle. The flail and its handle were loosely held together by the 2 leather loops, and the flail could swing easily in any direction, as we saw in that picture. Almanzo's flail was just like Father's, but it was new and did not need mending. When Father's flail was ready, they went to the south barn floor. There was still a faint smell of pumpkins, though the stock had eaten them all. A woodsy smell came from the pile of beech leaves, and a dry, strawy smell came from the wheat. Outside, the wind was screeching and the snow was whirling, but the south barn floor was warm and quiet. Father and Almanzo unbound several sheaves of wheat. That's the big stalks of wheat all bound together. and spread them on the clean wooden floor. Almanzo asked Father why he did not hire the machine that did threshing. So they do have some machines that do the threshing even in these times. 3 men had brought it into the country last fall, and Father had gone to see it. It would thresh a man's whole grain crop in a few days. That's a lazy man's way to thresh, Father said. Haste makes waste, but a lazy man would rather get his work done fast than do it himself. Now, sometimes it is best to do it fast, but Father is saying haste makes waste. So with threshing especially, if you do it quickly, then you're actually going to waste a lot of the grain. So it might get the job done quickly, but a lot gets just thrown away that shouldn't get thrown away. That machine chews up the straw till it's not fit to feed stock, and it scatters grain around and wastes it. So the grain is the good part that they want to get from the straw. And it chews up the straw so that actually they can't really use that for the animals very well. So all of the good stuff gets wasted. All it saves is time, son. And what good is time with nothing to do? You want to sit and twiddle your thumbs all these stormy winter days? There's nothing to do. Why do they need to get all the work done fast when they don't have anything going on? No, said Almanzo. He had enough of that on Sundays. We know he hates just sitting around and not doing anything. He would want to be busy doing stuff. Now they spread the wheat 2 or 3 inches thick on the floor. Then they faced each other, and they took the handles of their flails in both hands. They swung the flails above their heads and brought them down on the wheat. Father's struck, then Almanzo's, then Father's, then Almanzo's. Thud, 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 thud. It was like marching to the music on Independence Day. It was like beating the drum. Thud, 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 thud. Now the grains of wheat, sorry, I'm trying to get my sweater off because it's kind of warm. Now the grains of wheat were shelling from their little husks and sifting down through the straw. A faint good smell came from the beaten straw, like the smell of the ripe fields in the sun. Before Almanzo tired of swinging the flail, it was time to use the pitchforks. He lifted the straw lightly, shaking it, then pitched it aside. The brown wheat grains lay scattered on the floor. Almanzo and Father spread more sheaves over it, then took up their flails again. When the shelled grain was thick on the floor, Almanzo scraped it aside with a big wooden scraper. All that day, the pile of wheat grew higher. Just before chore time, Almanzo swept the floor in front of the fanning mill. Then Father shoveled wheat into the hopper, while Almanzo turned the fanning mill's handle. Let's see if we have any other good pictures to go along with the things being used. We've got a hay press. We're not getting to that. Here's a fanning mill. There we go. Now this tool was used, it says, to separate wheat grain from the chaff or garbage. So there's part that's a good wheat grain that they want to use, once again, for breads or whatever else they would use the grain for. And then the chaff is the part that needs to be thrown away. So this fanning mill separates it out. The harvested grain was shoveled into the hopper on top while the handle was turned. Here it is. As the fans worked inside the mill, chaff was blown out the front of the machine, and the kernels of clean wheat came out and were collected on another side. So it just separates it into 2 little groups. Then Father shoveled wheat into the hopper while Almanzo turned the fanning mill's handle. So the fans whirred inside the mill. A cloud of chaff blew out its front, and the kernels of clean wheat poured out of its sides and went sliding down the rising heap on the floor. Almanzo put a handful into his mouth. They were sweet to chew and lasted a long time. He chewed while he held the grain sacks, and Father shoveled the wheat into them. Father stood the full sacks in a row against the wall. A good day's work had been done. Let's say we run some beech nuts through, Father asked. So they pitched beech leaves into the hopper, and now the whirring fans blew away the leaves, and the 3-cornered brown nuts poured out. Well, that's a good use for it too. So it separates the leaves from the nuts. Almanzo filled a peck measure with them to eat that evening by the heater. Then he went whistling to do the chores. All winter long on stormy nights, there would be threshing to do. When the wheat was threshed, there would be the oats, the beans, the Canada peas. There was plenty of grain to feed the stock, plenty of wheat and rye to take to the mill for flour. Almanzo had harrowed the fields, he had helped in the harvest, and now he was threshing. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize we're not on it anymore. So he did every part of this. Almanzo had harrowed the fields. That's when he's planting it and helping it to grow. Harvesting is when they actually collect it. And threshing is when they separate it out so that the things that need to be used, the actual grain, they can have separate. So it is such a good feeling to take part in each part of the process. And it's going to be put to good use. The grain is also to feed the stock, it says, and plenty of wheat and rye to take to the mill for flour. So he helped to feed the patient cows and the horses eagerly whinnying over the bars of their stalls, and the hungrily bleating sheep, and the grunting pigs. And he felt like saying to them all, "You can depend on me. I'm big enough to take care of you all." And he is doing really well. Then he shut the door snugly behind him, leaving them all fed and warm and comfortable for the night. And he went trudging through the storm to the good supper waiting in the kitchen. So that is threshing. Now, tomorrow, you're going to hear about Christmas time. Oh, fun. What do you think Almanzo does at Christmas time? Think there's any similarities in the things that you do? Well, we'll see. Before we go, I did want to go over a few questions to keep in mind from what you were reading. So, first of all, how would you say Father and Almanzo thresh grain? Oh, I hate when that yellow happens. Yeah, they use the flail to swing it around, and they use that fanning mill to separate out the grain from, you know what, I'm going to switch to my camera. From the chaff. The chaff is the part that just needs to be tossed. And according to Father, what is a lazy man's way to thresh grain? That's right, he said haste makes waste, and a lazy man uses the machine, which saves time, but it actually wastes a lot of the crops themselves. So saving time is not a bad thing, but it needs to still be a good work that happens because of it. So haste can make waste. Sometimes doing something fast is still the correct way to do it, but a lot of times, like if you try to write something too quickly or solve a math problem too quickly without checking your work, then you might end up getting it wrong. So what's the point of hurrying through it if you end up getting it wrong? What different crops are threshed and or put through the fanning mill? The wheat, very good. And also they end up doing beech nuts. They put the beech nuts through the fanning mill. And how do you think Almanzo feels when he spends time in the snug barn, threshing and doing his chores? How does he feel? He likes it. He even was thinking, oh, it makes me feel like I am taking care of my animals. He loves animals. And so it feels so good if he's able to raise those crops, water them, collect them. That's the harvest process. And then actually feed them. That's the best feeling for him. So he loves it so much. Okay, do you think you would like that too? If any of you have pets, maybe you know the feeling a little bit of taking care of them, and when your dog or cat maybe gets excited about the food that you give them, it's a good feeling. So that's kind of what Almanzo is feeling here. That is all for today's reading. You'll have a few questions to answer on your own, and I will talk to you all later. Have a good day.